Hello everyone and welcome to Moonshot Contemplations episode 3. Each week we invite a special guest to help us broaden our horizon and introduce us to new ideas on how we can use frontier technologies and access to new domains to build a bigger and better world. We then host a second session for our diverse collection of members to engage in deeper discussions, and hopefully some of you will find some new inspiration to solve our greatest challenges. Our contemplations are by and for everyone, from founders to investors and researchers, from space infrastructure to manufacturing and biomedicine, from robotics to data analytics and AI. And today we're joined by Alisa Starkey of Ozius. And Alisa is passionate about improving our knowledge of the natural environment and began a professional career as an Earth observation scientist in 2002 before founding Ozius in 2014. Her experience is infusing artificial intelligence and Earth observation satellite data to solve complex environmental problems. And Ozius has analysed over 2 million square kilometres of the Earth's landscape across 4 continents by leveraging over 18 different optical, radar, and Earth observation satellites. Alisa, I love those numbers. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I like to ask this question to everyone as we sort of dive into this. What's the significance of outer space to you, both with your work and philosophically?
Yeah, sure. I think growing up in regional Australia had its benefits in that being able to look up at the night sky and see, the amazing stars in the Milky Way. It really brought out that it's all about possibility and no bounds, and also a lot of discovery. So I think it definitely had an impact on me quite early that I definitely wanted to keep exploring and discovering the unknown. And I guess that led me to a world of science and in particular discovering things here on Earth. I think then it's really driven me in the direction of my whole life, actually, being able to look up at the night sky as a kid and just wonder what's out there and how do I find out more about it.
Fantastic. And so what does your ideal world look like in, say, 10 years or 20 years, 50 years, given what you've just said?
Sure. I mean, there's that huge piece about the unknown, but what we're finding now is that we've got the space and technology capability in order to fill gaps in that knowledge. And in 10 years' time, I'd love to see, some of the largest organizations in the world being able to make decisions based on this information and basically not having to guess about what's going on here on Earth. We can actually quantify what's going on, and we can actually do that today thanks to space capabilities. But in 10 years, I'd like to see just more and more of that. I think we're just starting to touch on how we can integrate space technology into our daily lives. And then also being able to look outward too, and learn from other planets and other things going on in our solar system. And also just with being able to develop technology further over the next 10 years, I think it's just going to enable us to do so much more here on Earth, and that's really exciting.
Yeah. So one of the most the most interesting things about Ozius, from my perspective, is your origin story and where Ozius came from, particularly the name. With all of its drama and everything, can you please tell us that again?
Sure, no, it's great. Well, I think how Ozius began goes back to my days at university, having embarked on a career in science, or starting to by going to university, and doing an environmental science degree, and in particular marine ecology of all things. I was on the rocky platforms outside of Wollongong and studying crabs, crustaceans, and echinoderms, starfish, and just looking at biodiversity. And I was having to literally lift rocks and seaweed, looking for different animals to try and see how diverse the rocky platforms were that I was investigating. And one day I was out on one of these rocky platforms collecting my data. I had a GPS backpack on, and trying to make sure I noted down the location of where I found everything, and picked up a rock, and around that rock was a little bit of algae, and I thought, okay, let's see what's under this rock, and found Ozius truncata. So I was so excited. I was like, right, got another crab species, here we go. And accidentally dropped the rock, and it slipped out of my hands and smashed and killed Ozius. And there was definitely tears and drama, as I was, I wanted to make sure these crabs survived and thrived my scientific discoveries, but no, that one died, and it stayed with me. And fast forward to 2014, and had an opportunity to start my own business, and at that point, and also realizing that I should probably step back and do more remote observations of the environment, started Ozius, using Earth observation satellite data to measure and monitor the Earth from space.
It's such a great story, because I think a lot of people, especially when they're trying to develop a new name for a startup, it's really, really hard to choose a good name.
Yeah.
That's one of the best I've heard, I think. How long did that stick with you? Like, so you started Ozius in 2014. When was the Ozius, the incident, I'll call it?
It was 2001. So
yeah, okay, yeah.
So it was.
So it really stuck with you for a long time.
Definitely did. And
was there a day that went by where you didn't think about it, or is it one of those kinds of like pivotal events?
Yeah, no, I did move on, particularly when I could, when it led me to a world where I could actually get the bigger picture around where everything was, and actually look at the whole coastline in one snapshot by using satellite technology. But it definitely influenced my career pathway, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess from scouring the rocks near Wollongong to remote sensing, where did you first discover remote sensing, and how did you get interested in that? I guess you've worked in it for 20 years. That's a long time. So I would imagine from a time where Earth observation data was relatively, and you can correct me on this, relatively scarce compared to today. You were probably a little bit of a pioneer, acknowledging that satellite data goes back obviously decades and decades. But so tell us that journey.
I think, so there was definitely not degrees in Earth observation science or anything like that at that time. I happened to do one subject at university, but it was really just one subject in all the whole degree. So it's definitely not a major part of what I was doing. And I got to the end of my degree and loving being out on the rocky shores still. I did love the field component of what I was doing with science. And so I got to the end of my degree, and I Googled, or it may have been AltaVista at that stage.
That used to be my preferred browser. I haven't thought of that for a while. Yeah, I was like, who'd use Google?
I AltaVista my field trip, field data, field trip, Queensland. I liked Queensland as a place to discover, and I thought it was a bit warmer than where I was, and a job came up that was a remote sensing scientist for the Queensland government. And I read into it, and you got to be paid to travel around Queensland and collect environmental data and link that data to space data, which was at the time Landsat data. And I thought, wow, I've done my subject in remote sensing. I know what this is about, and this is absolutely thrilling that there's such a job like this. It was incredible to see. I had no idea you could actually have a career in that field at all. And to be able to bring the two loves together of field and the environment and space was just incredible. And I was fortunate enough to be a successful candidate for that job, and that really did absolutely kickstart everything from there. And so the Queensland government, having the programs they did, which already was as very early days of research and development into using space technologies to quantify different aspects. This was in particular looking at vegetation in Queensland. then it was an amazing first step into the industry, and it has evolved a lot since then, as we will probably talk about today a bit further. But just to give you an idea, in that job, we would get one seamless coverage of Landsat imagery, one date, just one image for every location across Queensland, and to get it took about 97 images to cover all of Queensland seamlessly. And it was
roughly, like, what was the resolution of 1 pixel then? That would be quite big still.
Well, yeah, it was about, well, it was 30 meters by 30 meters.
Right.
But we also tapped into data that was earlier, that was 60 meters by 80 meters. So it wasn't even a square.
Okay.
But yeah, so it was, and even then at that time, you actually had to pay for Landsat data, which is now an open data source. And it was very, very expensive just to get one look of the Earth in a year. And it also is a heavy processing, computational demand as well. So I think, yeah, we've come a long way in just my relatively short career.
Yeah, for sure. So so you spent so from 2002 to 2014, you're working in various roles with spatial data and Earth observation data and remote sensing. Why? What drove you to start Ozius? How did you come to the realization, all right, I need to go and start this business on my own? And what opportunities did you see at the time, and have they differed in the past?
Yeah, definitely.
Decade or so.
It was a perfect storm, I will say. I had actually left the R&D world to step into commercial consulting with a small business at the time, and did that in around 2010. And by 2013, we started to see the mining downturn, and that put pressure on businesses like the one I was in, and they actually had to shut down our team. And so I found myself being made redundant, and was like, well, what next? No one is really, there's no jobs in this field at the minute. I can switch careers, or I can follow my heart effectively. I went for a hike down in Tasmania and Cradle Mountain and got some fresh, clear air, and came back and was like, right, this is the time. We're facing an economic downturn, and what better time is it for companies to have to review the way they're doing things and look for better ways, more efficient ways, and more cost-effective ways to capture information about the environment over large areas really efficiently, and get answers and quantify what's going on remotely, rather than having to send people out into the field and not have it in a strategic way. So I thought, yep, now's the time that we can provide new solutions to businesses and help them save money and improve efficiencies. And then I thought, that's it, let's do this. And that was how we kickstarted Ozius. Thought, that's it, we're just going to start.
That's really great, actually, because I don't know if I was aware of that specific story beforehand as well. Ozius crab, I know very well.
Yeah.
At least that was one that really stuck with me. I think there's probably going to be a lot of people watching this where that will be quite resonant with them at the moment, given that we're in an economic downturn at the moment. And one of the things that we'll chat a little bit more about through this conversation is the use of this remote sense data to help us understand our world and our economy a little bit better too. So I was going to ask you what advice would you have, but that's a question for in a little bit. So we'll just keep that in mind. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well,
Yeah,
I was just going to say too, it also, as far as the perfect storm, it also was a time when data became more accessible. So businesses like Ozius actually couldn't really exist even 5 years before that, because the accessibility of data was a bit of a barrier. So a lot of different things happen to enable that decision to even happen, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little about the business model behind Ozius then. And particularly, I know there's, up until recently, like you mentioned, Landsat data is now free, but it wasn't before. And my understanding is that getting data from different satellites and aggregating them is a really, really tough challenge in itself. Where you've got our, Australian government put however many, a couple of $100 million or whatever it was into this a couple of years ago to build like a data cube to aggregate these sources. And what's the business model of Ozius look like, and what do you see as I guess shifting within the way that the remote sensing industry works?
Definitely. So we actually deliver answers directly into enterprise and government databases and for improved decision making. So we're not actually a platform or anything like that. We're providing data streams of updating things as things change, or just providing more data flows through into businesses around solving critical business problems. So our target customers are large enterprises and government, and with highly complex environmental problems effectively. We're currently providing solutions to customers in the energy, resources, government, and even defence sectors. And typically, we work with businesses that have tried, they give us a call once they've tried different ways to solve a problem and it hasn't actually worked for them in the past. So,
and when you say that, do you mean, not using remote sense data sets and things like that, like maybe smart cities solution? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so using either different technologies that are only giving, say, a point location and not being able to quantify what's going on in between, or a completely different approach that is even not even digital necessarily. So but just have had an attempt in the past, and maybe Earth observation or space-based data hasn't been a consideration, but once they give it a go, then they don't take back. So and I think being able to to be able to solve those really critical and challenging problems has really set us apart from other technologies, and also just other ways of solving problems effectively.
Yeah, well, that's great, because my next question was going to be what makes you so special and successful, and I guess it's probably that ability to not just say, look, we're aggregating data, it's actually taking it all the way to the end to say, look, we can make this, it's not just even just actionable information, we can help you actually take action using this data as a tool. Would I be right in saying that?
Absolutely. And on top of that, we bring together, as you mentioned a bit earlier too, we bring together sort of the best of breed as far as the technologies, and lean on, the fit for purpose satellites to make sure they're getting an answer that's at an appropriate scale for them. So being able to bring that, coming from an environmental science background as well, we bring that environmental science knowledge to the data as well. And so not just aggregating data, it's actually bringing some landscape sense to it as well, which really sets us apart too.
For sure, yeah. I think, a lot of people that hear about, what Earth observation data might do for them, it kind of sounds really cool, because it's always spoken about in a quite and pardon the pun, it's just a term that I love in my vocabulary, nebulous way. It can solve everyone's problems. It doesn't matter whether you're in mining or defense or agriculture, logistics, and all these kind of areas. But a lot of people in those areas don't necessarily see, what they can actually do with it, and where they can actually create value for their businesses and what they're doing. Could you give us a couple of examples of I guess different industries that can really benefit from this, where they might not be aware that it's a tool they can use at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually been the biggest challenge that we've had, particularly as a small business starting out, has been around the education of the potential and the possibilities around what it can do. And the interesting thing is that we've found is that how people actually use our information has been really innovative in itself for the particular businesses. So, and even amazes us. So we always say this doesn't narrow it down for you, but the possibilities are as big as your imagination in some places. So, but typically, looking at the mining sector, we're able to quantify vegetation from space, water from space, all sorts of different landscape processes and trends. So things like looking at rehabilitation for mining companies and oil and gas companies is definitely one. Looking at anything that changes that you don't want to have change is definitely a big application. And sometimes you need to know when something has changed as well. So looking for anomalies in the landscape, whatever they may be, is definitely another big area. We're seeing things around, even from local governments and smart cities, looking at, being able to report on the success of different management strategies they've put in place. And then also places like power line companies as well, being able to look at risk assets. And so the applications are very vast and also very critical. So getting the information into these businesses in a very timely fashion and accurately is quite critical to be able to trust the information coming through as well. Has been something that we've worked on to educate the market around the capabilities that we can bring.
And I guess a question that I should probably ask you as well, for people that aren't too familiar with observation data, who might just have an impression that it might be entirely just, literally just cameras in space to see visual stuff. Could you give us a very quick overview of, we don't necessarily need to dive into what synthetic aperture radar, multispectral, those kinds of things are, but could you give us a quick pitch on how we can see what we might describe colloquially here as the invisible?
So I say we get to see beyond the rainbow every day. We're able to tap into these different sensors by many different governments and companies. So for example, there's satellites that are those sort of global monitoring satellites, and we're seeing everything from very deep blues of the rainbow, very deep blues, blue, green, red, we're seeing some yellow, and then past red we're seeing into the near infrared. And so it's sort of like running effectively like when you go in to see about whether you've got a broken bone or not, and you go and get an x-ray. Effectively those machines are casting a new pieces of information over your body to figure out what's going on, and we're scanning the earth with these different wavelengths to understand, and break down and analyze what's actually happening. So we get to see the whole range of wavelengths, and that's just the optical satellites. And as you sort of mentioned, we can go into sort of the more active satellites as well, where we can move into synthetic aperture radar satellites, and more recently too, we're actually seeing the world's first LiDAR from space. So that's been really exciting to see. That's called the JEDI mission, and it's fantastic. So and it's really recent and just getting data sets through now. So we're constantly seeing space evolve in the sensors that are available, and the types of technology, and then the different wavelengths that we have in our toolkit to assess what's going on. And some are designed for very specific uses, while others are very a bit more generic. It's just really great to see the range of technologies that we can draw on to answer very specific questions.
Yeah, fantastic. One of the things I'm really interested to hear your perspective on, as someone who's worked in essentially big data from way back when it was just starting out, just after the .com boom. is, I guess, how it's evolved over time. My understanding, so correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding has almost been sort of, this is a second wave that we're seeing, due to the boom of, got all these new cheap and powerful satellites that people and, governments and organizations and people and individuals are putting up into space, recording a whole bunch of data. And a lot of it can't even, there's so much data that a lot of it gets dropped. If it doesn't get dropped, a lot of it gets put into data sets where, we don't necessarily know how to extract all of the useful value out of it yet. And it's almost like what we saw, about 15 years ago with, the original sort of big data boom, where the web was increasing and, had a whole bunch of corporations and governments just trying to hoard as much data because they knew it would be valuable. We didn't know how to process it. As our machine learning capabilities got better, slowly, I don't think a lot of us realized that we sort of solved a lot of those issues. And so, we're seeing sort of this big data challenge again. Could you, what's your experience with that? How have you seen it evolve? What do you see happening in the future as well?
Definitely. Yeah, look, I think in many respects, Earth observation scientists have been, wrangling big data for many decades, and so along with the advancements in machine learning techniques and other deep learning techniques, we've been testing different ways to optimize how we handle and analyze this data. And I think we've, there's some different challenges with I call it big geo data in a way, because we've got lots of dimensions with the data when it comes to Earth observation data. It's not, just one line of data and a lot of it. There's lots of different dimensions. And so I think there's a lot to embrace, though, when it comes to integrating the worlds around the more typical big data and Earth observation big data. So at Ozius, we're often fusing the Earth observation big data with other big data sets like climate data or enterprise databases that have been, wrangling the big data question for decades themselves. So I think there's going to be more integration. And I think one of the big trends we're seeing is definitely being sort of having cross-platform capabilities, but also the space-based EO, Earth observation users. We're looking for ways to obtain that big data faster, and so that we can start to look at near real-time applications from space. So I think there's lots of opportunities that we can both take on board some of the learnings of the evolution of big data processing, and bring things together as well. So things like looking at lossless data compression and looking at better communication networks, high-speed communication networks, and also that data traceability piece through advancements in metadata creation, storage, and also authentication. So how do we actually ensure that the feed from space is all connected to correct timestamps and all the rest, other attributes. So I think, and then there's the actual processing techniques as well. So there's a lot of overlap between the worlds, and I think it's just about keeping your mind open and looking for those advancements and taking them on board where you can.
So I guess if there's people watching, what are the opportunities for others to get involved? And in particular, I think a question that I have, something you mentioned before about open data sources. We're seeing a lot more data sources that are open, a lot more data sources that are paid as well. How do people get started if they're interested in it?
That is
and how? Yeah, it is a tough one. I'm sorry.
Because there is a level of expertise required. I think we are seeing companies out there that are helping to sort of lower that barrier to entry somewhat, but there is still an awful lot of work to be done to align data sets and get things fundamentally right to enable people to tap in at different points and leverage that for new solutions. So I think there are some really exciting opportunities out there, but I think sometimes it's really great to also just look inward a bit and sort of say, well, I have these skill sets, so how can I transfer them to, you know, a space economy effectively? And so some people that, as I sort of mentioned, with that might be working on sort of better lossless data compression algorithms might actually go, well, let's take on board some of the EO data to look and see if we can make that easier to handle and to wrangle. So there's lots of different places in the ecosystem where people can tap in at different points. But it's and like I said, and we've also got to be outward looking as well, and sort of say, well, what can we take and learn from that's happened in the past that we don't have to reinvent when we apply things to Earth data.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting areas as an electronics engineer that I've seen people starting to look at is, you know, we've got limited bandwidth from these satellites to send data down. And so, you know, particularly with, you know, multispectral or hyperspectral sort of systems as well, can we be more selective, or can we process data on the satellites before we do that? And it's really interesting seeing that, you know, I guess that supply chain within the industry start to form as well.
I totally agree. And that's where, as I mentioned, that supply chain piece, like every step, there is room for advancements to be undertaken, which is what to me makes it such an exciting industry to be a part of. And I think we're going to see huge leaps in the next few years. It won't just be you know, a trickle. It's going to be I think it's going to be a tsunami, a tsunami of data too.
So I guess quick question about the role of government. So the last couple of conversations and the original one that we had, the theme was, you know, one of the themes was the role of government. And I think, you know, Earth observation, especially, you know, in Australia, is a really interesting one because we've put so much funding, or the federal government have put so much funding into this area recently. You know, Frontier SI, previously COC Spatial Information, have been doing some really amazing work as well. So there's a lot of stuff happening. What do you see, you know, as a private company, the role of government doing to facilitate the growth of this? And, you know, are they doing too much? Are they doing too little? What's your perspective?
I think so it's a bit of a hard question to answer, as I think it's still early days as well, and so it's hard to sort of see where, you know, some tangible outcomes from the efforts that have been made to date as of yet. I think it's also important to acknowledge that before the space agency came along, there was space-related research and businesses already established and operating. And, you know, we've had the Space Industry Association as a body around that prior to the space agency. And so I think there is lots to be done by the government around supporting all aspects of the supply chain where they can, and I think there has been a focus on you know, not trying to reinvent wheels, and how can we leverage both locally and internationally the work that's been done in the past, and to move our space industry forward, and also realizing that we probably, you know, we can contribute to so many parts of the global space industry as well. So it's really exciting that, you know, we do have companies that operate in launch, in satellite, you know, the onboard processing piece, and then satellite communications and positioning, and then downstream as well. So the fact that we do have, you know, we already have companies operating there is really exciting, and also in the manufacturing space as well. So as far as government, I think it's just about staying connected, I guess, with industry, and because there's going to be different needs as we all evolve, and I think there are opportunities as well for the government to look within and you know, even look to review outdated legislation, and that might be everything from how to get to space and testing and that sort of thing, through to actually, well, how do users on the ground incorporate space tech, basically effectively Earth observation data, to rely on it for regulatory reporting, for example. So we find sometimes companies there's been a reluctance because there's been legislation around naming technologies that must be used to report on something, when those technologies themselves are outdated, or could be used in a different way to get a better outcome for everyone. So I think, there's opportunities to review that legislation at, again, every step of that the supply chain there. And there's opportunities also to be a buyer, rather than handing out money to just one initiative. Actually be a buyer of some of the answers that we can provide to help improve government processes and actually support the community. So there's opportunities looking to the private sector to move rapidly on certain pieces, particularly you know, to get better community outcomes around, say, the bushfire recovery. And there's also opportunities to support the private sector to move to do rapid R&D, as we see in Europe and America in particular. It's happening right now with the government support there. So I think it doesn't have to always sit with government, and that there's opportunities to work in partnership with government on many different facets.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess as we come towards the end of our session, I'm keen to know what kind of advice you have for the different groups that we work with. So we'll start off with founders. You know, if there's founders that are looking to get into the space economy, that are looking to use Earth observation data to develop, you know, different parts of the supply chain they operate in, what advice do you have for them to get started, especially considering that we're in an economic downturn at the moment? And I think your story might be a little bit inspirational for some people that are sitting on the fence, wondering whether they should keep trying to find another job, or whether they can create themselves a business and find their own opportunities.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so for founders or potential founders, I think don't be discouraged if you can't initially get investment from venture capital to kickstart thing. I think it's, you know, it is hard work going down the venture capital route, and it's not necessarily right for every business. So there's some really obvious reasons to get it, but sometimes it's not a one size fits all. So I think while it's right for many businesses in the space industry, it hasn't been right for us so far. So we've got great business, amazing tech, but I think you know, for us, our focus has been on spending that time in building a customer base and to grow our business that way. So there's lots of different ways you can grow businesses, and so keeping an open mind there. And also I think I think it doesn't hurt to, we've seen a lot of people step slowly into being founders, particularly in our industry. And then we've also seen people probably jump headfirst into it, like myself. And and so it's just a really exciting time, but it's really extremely rewarding. But it is not easy, and it's very challenging. And so it's not right for everyone too. I think sometimes you might want to be a part of the space industry as a startup, but you may not necessarily want to be the founder either. You might want to look at joining another established business and established startup. And so I think just being honest with yourself about where your best efforts are placed is the best advice there. Then when it comes to investors, I think there's a lot of, what's the word here, underutilized and underutilized technologies, and so there's actually a lot of room to get in early still. I don't think it's too late. Yeah, I don't think it's too late, you know, just because the space race has been around for a long time. I think there's a lot of emerging technologies and businesses that can really benefit from investment, and it's actually a really exciting time to see what's going to happen next there. So I definitely think there's for some savvy investors, there's some really great opportunities out there. And then when it comes to the government as well, I think it's those looking at the government more broadly too. There's the actual government directly interested in building the space economy, and as I mentioned, there's also parts of the government where it's about being a space enabling part of the government, and so being able to listen and learn from people that you're serving and regulating. And we're also a really tight space community here in Australia, and we've actually got a lot of experience, and we come from different backgrounds with different perspectives, and so I think if we all work together, we can definitely see, you know, the Australian flag flying in outer space, whether it be the moon, Mars, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that was really good. Thanks. You remembered each of those pretty well. So that was great. And I might just add to that as well. Carly mentioned that I should try to probably plug Moonshot just a little bit more. If you are, you know, someone who's not necessarily looking to start their own business, Moonshot, we you know, our programs and talks like these are for you just as much as they are founders and investors and policymakers too. We're really trying to bring and create the culture where everyone can come together to have these conversations. So if you're looking to enter the space sector, and you're not sure where to go, then yeah, come and have a chat to us as well.
And just on that too, Troy, I think there's something that I haven't mentioned is around the fact that the space economy itself is quite diverse, and you know, we do need engineers, we need lawyers, we need the, you know, communications experts, we need business and economics experts, and we even need marketing, you know, experts and communications in that term as well, to be able to translate, you know, some very heavy science into very easy to understand, you know, pieces of formats of communication. So I think there's lots of ways to get involved, and you know, rocket scientists and space scientists and Earth observation scientists aren't the only ways. Yeah,
entirely. And I think for me, I look at, you know, the space, you know, I talk about the space economy because the way I see it is, you know, and Earth observation is a perfect example for it, really, because it's at the forefront with telecommunications. It's a global economy that is expanding into space, that is enabling our entire world to rely on space infrastructure more heavily. And so because of that, it necessarily requires everybody that's in the economy to get involved at the moment. And I know that there's a lot of people who are in marketing, who are in law, who are in all these different areas that are starting to discover that space law is a thing, that a lot of the emerging space startups need some marketing support, because they're rocket scientists or rocket engineers, you know, they've got that deep technical capability, but they need the marketing support now as well. So everybody can get involved in space, which is exciting. If you've got your 3-year-old inner child screaming out saying you want to get involved in space and you didn't think you could because you're not a rocket scientist and you're an adult now, well, you can. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Alisa, this has, as always, been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I could probably keep talking to you for hours and hours, but unfortunately we can't. Where can we find out more and keep track? What's your website? Are you on social media?
Sure. Gotta get all my details. If you'd like to find out more, then you can follow me. It's Alisa Starkey. And my Twitter handle is @waterlis, just water, LIS _EO. And Ozius is on Twitter, and our Twitter handle there is @Ozius Spatial. And our website is Ozius, ozius.com.au.
Great. Thanks so much, Alisa. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us for episode 3 of Moonshooter Contemplations. I hope you'll all join us for the follow-up discussion with us on Tuesday via Zoom. Otherwise, I'll see you for episode 4 next week, or potentially on Thursday. We're still catching up on getting this all kickstarted. We'll be talking about bioastronautics and making space habitats here on Earth so that we can conduct R&D and start to learn how can humans and how can life survive and thrive in new locations beyond Earth, and what that means for us back here on Earth as well. So that's going to be a really exciting discussion. Hope you'll join us for that. Alisa, thanks so much again. And everybody, ad Astra.
Thanks.